Good morning, everyone. Today we're learning Parshas Yisro. It is the Torah reading that describes, among other things, what we in Jewish teaching call Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, or others might refer to it as the revelation at Sinai. Very important moment in Jewish history and in Jewish thought. Let's take a look at one of the verses in that narrative in the Torah that caught my attention today, and I hope we can analyze it together. And that is Exodus chapter 19, verse 19, which is on page 294 in the Encino Chumash. Page 294, Exodus 19:19. The Torah is describing what's the opposite of aftermath? What's the opposite of aftermath? What comes before? What comes before the math? No, guys. What's an aftermath? What's the opposite of an aftermath?
Precursor.
A precursor. Thank you. So the Torah is describing the precursor to this fateful moment, the giving of the Torah. It was on the third day at morning. I'm just going back a little bit to verse 16, chapter 19, verse 16. It was on the third day of Sivan, after the children of Israel had prepared themselves spiritually for this experience. It was on the third day of preparation at morning time, and there was thunder and lightning and a thick cloud upon the mountain, and the sound of the shofar exceedingly strong, and all of the people that were in the camp trembled. Moshe brought forth the people out of the camp to greet God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. They stood at the bottom of the mountain. Mount Sinai was altogether smoking, filled with smoke, because God had descended on it in fire. And its smoke ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. And now we come to verse 19, the verse upon which I'd like to focus today. The sound of the shofar waxed louder and louder. Now pay attention to this phrase. Moshe yedaber v'ha Elokim ya'anenu v'kol. Moses spoke, and God answered him in a voice. What on earth does this mean? Moshe spoke, and God answered him with a voice.
As opposed to what? Okay.
And then the Torah continues to describe the introduction to say something awesome is about to happen. Don't let anybody go onto the mountain. There's a discussion about not going onto the mountain, etc., etc. And then immediately after that, chapter 20, verse 1 begins the Ten Commandments. Or I should say verse 2 begins the Ten Commandments. So let's look at some of the commentaries on this verse. Moshe speaks, and Elohim, God, will answer with a voice. What could this mean? Midrash says, this is from the Mechilta, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says, how do you say, from where do we know God doesn't speak until Moshe says, God, speak, because the people are ready to hear him. And therefore it says, Moshe speaks and God answers in a voice. That is to say, Rabbi Akiva says, certainly. What is the Torah saying when it says Moshe speaks? So Rabbi Eliezer is suggesting that Moshe speaks kind of indicates that the people are ready to hear what God has to say. Rabbi Akiva says, certainly, what is the Torah saying when it says Moshe speaks? It is that God gave the strength, the power to Moshe, and God helped him speak. And in the sound that Moshe was expressing, or the sound that Moshe hears, that is what he expresses to the children of Israel. Therefore it says, Moshe speaks and God responds to him in a voice. That is to say, Rashi says, Midrash Agada says, V'ha'elokim ya'anenu v'kol, and God would answer in a voice. What voice? What would God answer him if not in a voice? The voice of Moses, the kolo shel Moshe. Rashi says that when Moshe would speak, God responded by giving Moshe a voice. That is, it seems like Rashi is kind of synthesizing these midrashic teachings to say, when Moshe speaks, he has the power to speak because God gives him the power to speak. Or God amplified Moshe's voice. But actually what the verse says is God, and most explicitly in Midrash Agada, Moshe speaks, and Moshe speaks and God responds with the voice of Moshe. Rashbam gives an interesting interpretation. He says, Moshe speaks to God. No one was able to hear this. Only God was able to hear it. But God responded to Moshe in a voice with a great sound. That is, so that because when Moshe speaks, he can speak silently and God will hear him. But when God speaks, he has to speak in a loud voice so as to overpower the sound of the shofar so that people can hear him. Moshe speaks in silence because he's speaking to God. God speaks in a loud voice because he's speaking to people. So far we have two approaches. One is suggesting that the voice of Moshe is the voice of God. Moshe speaks and God is speaking along with him. And the other approach is that there is a voice of God distinct from the voice of Moshe. So another interpretation is Ibn Ezra, in which he says Moshe would speak with the sound of the shofar, because Moshe was in that moment in a state of attachment to God, or maybe constantly, but in any case, certainly here, Moshe is in a state of attachment to God, and so God is speaking. Moshe is speaking, and that's expressing his state of attachment to Hashem. And God would answer in a voice that Moshe would hear. So let's take a step back for a moment and consider what does it mean that God speaks? What does it mean that Moshe speaks? Of course, when we talk about divine speech, it's a metaphor, right? Because God has no physical form. Or is it? There are two, Eov says, Kel Deos Hashem. God is let's see. Sorry, that's Shmuel Aleph. Kel Deos Hashem. God knows everything, right? That's the translation. Kel Deos Hashem. God knows everything. The word Kel Deos means God has let's break up the words. Kel, God, Deos, knowledges, ideas is God, or right? The mighty one, knowledges is God. So the translation is that God knows everything. The Kabbalists look at this verse and they say, God knows everything, being in the plural, that is, that there are two ways to know the world. The Kabbalists say there are two ways of knowing the world, and God is in both of them. And this is a fundamental idea in Kabbalistic teaching, in Jewish mysticism and spirituality, which is really important to know clearly and well. There are two ways of knowing the world, and God knows both of them, or they are divine ideas. One is Da'at Elyon, the higher knowing, in which we would say the world, in which we would say, what is truth? What is truth? Truth is spirituality. Those are capital T truths. And the higher a person gets, the more connected with spirituality that a person is, the more they can be associated with truth, capital T. And the things that people think here on earth are temporary illusions, our sense of being different, our sense of being separate from each other, all of these things are not true with a capital T. The real truth is that it's all one. And if we connect spiritually, if we're really oriented spiritually, then we're in Das Elyon, we're in the higher knowledge mode. The other is the Dat Tachton, which says the world was created something from nothing. And that there is a truth in the way in which people think. That is, God created this world, and it is a manifestation of a godly of God's will. This creation of the world, right? This teaches that the creation of the world isn't in opposition with God. It is created by God, and therefore it's a manifestation of God's will. If the creation is a manifestation of God's will, then that which exists theoretically in the spiritual worlds comes to its practical reality in the human dimension, in the worldly dimension. And so therefore in Dat Tachton, in the lower knowledge, it's a divine idea that that creations can exist as separate beings, and that they would have their perspective. All of this is created by God in this moment too, so that his will could be fulfilled. And in a way, the Dat Tachton says, meaning let's talk about the idea of the creation of the world for a moment, right? When we say that truth with a capital T is spirituality, and that our separateness, our sense of self is an illusion, that is to say that the world was created in illusion out of truth. Ayin miyesh. That is, that the more spiritually minded we are, the more we're connected with truth. But the creation of the world, the more we enter into the creation of the world, into the worldly mentality, we are entering more and more into an illusionary perspective. We are caught up on nonsense. Human beings are so obsessed with things of little importance. And ultimately their value, their essence, the nature of their existence itself is of ayin, is nothingness, is illusory. Illusion, illusory, illusory. So this is the Dat Elyon. The world is created in illusion out of truth. And then we have Da'at Tachton, which says, the classic teaching, the world is created yesh me'ayin. The world is a created thing that comes from nothing, right? We talk about the glory of God. How amazing is God, the creator, that people can only make things out of other things. But God created the world out of nothing. But let's meditate on those words for a moment. When we say God created the world out of nothing, we're saying that the created existence in which we live, the mentality of human beings, is a true existence which is more true than the nothing which preceded it. That there is a reality here that is more real than the nothingness that preceded it. What might that mean? So when we think about this world, and the things that people care about, these, what we referred to in the Da'at Elyon mode, in the other dynamic as illusory, the things that people are caught up about, things that people are all obsessed about, that's real, that's true. It's more true than the spirit world. Truth with a capital T is in the empirical reality of earth, more than in the spiritual. So these are two deot, these are two orientations of the divine itself. These aren't contradictions. So if we would think, what does God think? It seemed to me that our instinct would say, what does God think? The truth with a capital T is spiritual. Comes Hasidic teaching and Kabbalistic teaching to say, there is another truth, which is that empirical reality is truth with a capital T, even more than the spiritual world. How can this be? So if we think not about what is true in a spiritual sense, but instead, what does God want? That's one way of thinking about it. What does God want? God wants us to serve him. This is possible only in the empirical reality. In the abstract oneness of the spiritual orientation, it is impossible to be a servant of God. And therefore, there is a greater desire, there is a real investment of the divine into this lower mindset, so to speak. Now, when we another important another way of looking at this is to say that the greatest power of God, the amazing nature of there is something profound to be perceived in the greatness of God, particularly in God's manifesting the empirical reality, the created world, and that it, in a sense, embodies or expresses, demonstrates a profound and truly amazing, paradoxical reality that confounds the human mind. Meaning, let's think about this for a moment. In the Western conception, people, or which, by the way, has its roots in to a certain degree has its roots in idolatry. There is this idea that God is a spirit. Judaism teaches that God is everything and beyond, or that everything is within God. And so therefore, to say that God is a spirit is a small-minded approach to thinking about God. And so I'll just finish the thought. And then so when we consider the empirical reality that it is manifested by God, this is a far more profound conception of the divine than the higher Da'at Elyon. Jane, what do you want to say?
You can start the computer.
It's okay.
I want to say that in the Garden of Eden, if we go back to Genesis, all there was before the sin was truth and not truth, God and not God. Only truth and not truth. After the sin, there was good and evil. And what we're trying to do is get rid of the evil by working on the physical and not the spiritual. So in working on the physical, we're helping the spiritual rise up and getting back to truth, which was originally in the Garden of Eden, and which is the spiritual. But I think the way that I understand it is that by us working on the spiritual through the physical, through the empirical, through the creation of the world, we will eventually come to a higher truth than Adam and Eve even had.
Yeah.
And that it will be only through us Jews and hopefully teaching the rest of the world, or being an example to the rest of the world, which is a little bit chauvinistic of us to say, but through our religion and through other people's goodwill, will that happen? That there'll be a higher truth than ever before.
Yeah.
Through the physical.
Mm-hmm. Right. So this very well stated. Thank you. So this idea of the dot tachton, the lower consciousness, creates the context in which these two things happen. One of them is God's will is realized, that we can serve him. And the other thing that happens is we shatter our conception of what God manifest is. Now we return to the verse, chapter 19, verse 19. Moshe Yedaber v'ha'elokim ya'anenu v'kol. Moses speaks, and God answered him in a voice. So notice, there are two voices here. Moshe speaks, and God responds in the voice. And this, says the Torah Or, refers to these two consciousnesses, these two conceptions of reality. And by reality, I mean the totality of reality, including God's mind, so to speak, and what is truth. There is Moshe speaking, and there is God responding. Torah Or says when Moshe speaks, he speaks in the higher reality. So that when people, servants of God, seekers of truth, aspire to understand reality in its truest sense, what we do is we sublimate our selfish and separate mind and orientation. We sublimate that. And that, by the way, is another meaning of the word yedaber, is to put down, to sublimate, to even to suppress. So when Moshe speaks, when the servant of God speaks, they orient themselves toward the Da'at Elyon, to saying truth with a capital T is spiritual, is not in the physical, not in the empirical. Truth with a capital T is in the eternity. God responds. Elokim ya'anenu v'kol. God responds in the voice. By the way, as we said, the Midrash says in the voice of Moshe. That is, God answers and says, there is another way of looking at life. And that is that your voice, Moshe, the empirical experience, the experience of individual separateness, indeed, the reality of the created world is a manifestation of me. And that when you do a mitzvah, you reveal my inner desire, my intent in the creation of the world. So that the creation of the world, this lower reality, so we might consider that when we talk about these two realities, Da'at Elyon and Da'at Tachton, this was something that, Jane, you alluded to in your comment. Before the world was created, there was only Da'at Elyon. Truth with a capital T was a spiritual reality, was divine consciousness. God creates the world, and in so doing creates a new truth. Why did God, right? And that's the truth of empirical reality, which is created by God, as we said, is a manifestation of divine truth. Why did God do that? He did that because he wanted the special service called mitzvahs. He wanted this divine holiness called compassion. Right? In the spiritual truth with a capital T, there is no compassion. There is only oneness. But in this world, it's possible to see what we couldn't see in the Da'at Elyon. Of course, in God's truth, in the totality of divine truth, compassion is there also. Right? But you don't see that in the Da'at Elyon. You only see that in the Da'at Tachton, in the lower reality. So when God creates the world, and in so doing creates Da'at Tachton, the lower consciousness, the consciousness of empirical reality, what he does, the reason he does this is to reveal the compassionate capacity within God. And this is brought about through human action. It's necessitated by the human experience of need, loneliness, etc. And it's brought about by human action of expressing that compassion, that care, that connectedness. And so Moshe Yedaber, Moses, the seeker of God, the servant of the holy divine, aspires to great sanctity, and he turns to serve God. Right, looking for the truth, the capital T in the spirit, in the spiritual reality. And the response to that Of course, Moshe is doing the mitzvahs, right? But his hope in doing the mitzvahs is to connect with the divine, to connect with the higher truth. But the response to that is that God becomes then expressed in the voice of Moses, in the voice of Moshe Rabbeinu, in the human reality, and something entirely beautiful becomes revealed. The Da'at Tachton, the lower reality. And this, in a way, is God's voice spoken through Moses. God's the totality of the paradox, in a way, it's easier for us humans to conceptualize the divine as this Western notion of a spirit, right? Even though we're thinking of something that we really can't understand. But when we think of the transcendent, right? When we think of God in this transcendent sense, that's something that kind of can sit well with us. What is the beyond? The beyond is transcendent and spiritual. Comes the Das Tachton and says something amazing. That God is here in the voice of the compassionate, caring person. And this is something which is so paradoxical. It's mind-blowing. And when the human mind is blown, when we're confused and it doesn't make sense, we find it hard to absorb this idea. We then we have entered into a reality which is superhuman, outside of the human, right? So again, humans, that God is beyond our understanding and outside of our experience, this makes sense to us. But that our experience could be a manifestation of the divine, mamish, that's too great for us to understand. And in that moment, we are in the greatness of God. So Moshe speaks. Moshe speaks towards God. And then God responds by saying, your voice is my voice. So when we do mitzvahs, when we engage in sacred, God-oriented activities, we then, while our intent is to be sanctified and God-oriented, our actions, as commanded by Hashem, are to be connected with our fellow human beings in a compassionate way, and to bring the presence of God for example, and we bringing the presence of God into the physical reality. And then we see that we are able to then perceive, to hear the voice of God manifest in the physical reality. I'll conclude with a story. You know what? Story goes like this. There was a spiritual seeker who wanted so much to experienced the Gilui Eliyahu, the revelation of Elijah the prophet. He wanted to have the mystical experience of seeing Elijah the prophet. What secrets would Elijah the prophet tell me if I could meet with him once? What truths would become known to me? So he had this. So what does a chassid do? He wants to see Eliyahu HaNavi, so he went to the Rebbe. And he says, Rebbe, please teach me how to see Eliyahu HaNavi. I want to see Elijah the prophet. The Rebbe said, no problem. I'll teach you. He says, in the corner of town, on the edge of town, in the periphery, there's the slums over there. He says, this Shabbos, I want you to go on Friday afternoon, before Shabbos. And I want you to bring a Shabbos meal to such and such house. He gave him an address. Well, there was no address then. It was the slums. There's no addresses over there. You're going to go to this hut. There's a family over there. And you make Shabbos with them. And so the chassid was a wealthy man. And he purchased catering, delicious food. Not only that, he purchased dishes and tablecloths, everything, servingware, the whole kit and caboodle, soup to nuts. And he packs it on a wagon, and Friday afternoon he shows up at this hovel, this hut. He knocks on the door, and he says, the Rebbe sent me. He told me I should spend Shabbos with you. Okay, the Rebbe said, the Rebbe said. They open the door. He unpacks his boxes. Food, like these people have never seen before in their lives. And of course, he sits down and they daven and he makes kiddush, wine, a kiddush cup he brought, everything. And he starts singing Zmiras. You understand this chassid is so high, he's thinking, Eliyahu is going to walk in the door any minute. Elijah the prophet, I'm going to see his presence. And so he was in such a spiritual high. He sang nigunim, sang songs, and he told divrei Torah, and all the children spoke their divrei Torah, and they ate so well, delicious. Shabbos morning, the same thing. Shabbos meal, davening, divrei Torah, words of Torah, Shabbos semiros, Shabbos songs. So beautiful. Shabbos comes to an end, and the chassid hasn't seen Elijah the prophet. He packs up his stuff. He leaves with them the dishes, the silverwares. He packs up his stuff and he goes out, back home. As he leaves the house, the hut, he overhears one of the children saying to the mother, who was that? And why did he come here? The mother said to the child, this had to be Eliyahu HaNavi.
Wow.
This had to be Elijah the prophet. To have such a Shabbos.
Wow.
So beautiful, unexpected, a miracle. That mystery man who we never saw before was Elijah the prophet. And so this, I think, is a way of explaining how Elokim Ya'anenu B'Kol. God responds in the voice of Moshe. When Moshe speaks within his reality, he does it because he seeks God. But actually, that's the voice of Moshe. The voice of Moshe is the one who whispers to God. The voice of God is the human being who speaks with compassion to their fellow human being.
Beautiful.